Thank you, Ben. What I'm going to do is make a blunt statement first. Then I'm going to justify that statement by a few things about Nepal, the current roiling that we are going through in water and energy. And then from that, I'm going to come back and ask, what does it mean for a transition to a renewable future? And hopefully I'll have provoked you enough, because I don't believe in not provoking. So that's where we start. Now, what I argue is that in Nepal, the 1990s was a period of massive water energy turmoil, activism, fights, transboundary issues of India, governments collapsing on bad projects, the World Bank having to pull out of a very bad project it was pushing through called Arun 3, great success for social and environmental activists, interestingly not on environmental grounds. This is the thing that's amazing about Nepal, is that the World Bank had to withdraw from this hydro project, the biggest that was being planned for Nepal, not because as social environmental activists, I was involved in that also. We talked about environment. We deliberately left environment aside. Why? Because we knew that if you use environment, that was strategic. The World Bank will say that we've got mitigation measures, and then you wait 30 years to find out it doesn't work. You've surrendered the terrain. So what we attacked the bank was on bad economics. Bad economics by the World Bank of trying to build a hydro project in Nepal, one of the poorest countries, with one of the richest hydropower potentials, at 5 times the market rate. Now this was, we thought, a crime, because as consumers we would have to pay for it. Now attacking the World Bank on economics and telling them they've done bad economics is like telling Ayatollah Khomeini you don't know the Quran, baby. So the bank never recovered. Okay. And so this is an interesting story. And as a result in Nepal we've gone through debates on water, energy, and a whole lot of things. That brings me to what I title as second generation problems. I mean, in Nepal it's no longer small versus big. That's just we saw that 20 years ago. Now it is small risk or big risk. Who bears the risk? What's the politics of risk shoving off to someone else, and so on. So this is where the big debate is coming around, and we call that second generation problems. Okay. Now, my blunt statement is that there's a huge gap between rhetoric and reality in development, water, energy. The example I would give is that Nepal is supposed to be rich in hydropower potential. Even I use this word. I hate using that. And the rhetoric in Nepal is we are second only to Brazil in whatever potential. I worked in Brazil 2 months ago. I was there, have Brazilian friends. I've yet to find one Brazilian who says we're number one. And I don't know why we Nepalis are going around from the king downwards, from the president and all downwards, right to this thing that we are second after Brazil. Anyway, point is, we have 1 foot on a hot stove and another in a freezer. One where we have 4 months of floods, monsoon floods, and 8 months of drought. We are a semi-arid region. My first trip to Britain in 1970, whatever it was, 6, there was a huge drought, for a whole month, blue sky. I liked it, I came as a tourist. But then I heard that the word drought in England meant 3 weeks without rain. But we have 7 months without rain. So this is the kind of place, and so when you have 1 foot in a freezer and 1 in a hot stove, you can't say on the average you are comfortable. This is what saying Nepal is rich in hydropower is like. And we have 15 hours of power cuts a day, by the way, right now. So this something is wrong. Similarly, 15 hours of power cuts in our national grid, because the utility has 700 megawatts of hydro and about roughly 70 or whatever megawatts of diesel thermal, say 700 megawatts hydro. It took us 100 years to get there. I was surprised in Bavaria, I was there recently, where I noticed that the first Bavarian and maybe the first German hydropower plant was started in 1911 and built in 2013. Nepal's first hydropower plant was 2011, 2 years ahead of the Germans. So you cannot say that we are behind in technology, in a sense. Okay? But now they manufacture BMWs and do all kinds of funny things. Okay? Now, the point is, it took us 100 years to get to 700 megawatts. In the last 5 years, because the utility cannot provide electricity, there is 700 megawatts of petrol and diesel generators in private houses, shopping complexes, hotels, and so on. So in 5 years, we've got the equivalent of what it took 100 years to build. Now, why this is very funny is that this entire international development policy and national policy making is totally blind to it. You have 700 megawatts of diesel equivalent to your whole national grid right under your nose. You can't go to any shopping complex without, hearing the, generator going on. There's no policy, nothing on it. And the assumption is Nepal is a poor country, doesn't have capital to develop. Well, where did the money come from this? To put 700 megawatts of diesel. And by the way, they're paying, the national grid rate is about 9 to 11 rupees per kilowatt hours. These guys with these generators in shops and shopping complexes are paying anywhere from 30 to 80 rupees. So there's the willingness to pay and the ability to pay. But there's some kind of a massive trust deficit when it comes to anything that is a national utility. Now this is a research item, and if I had a PhD student, they'd say, okay, go do it. So my argument is there's a huge gap. Now why does that happen? It happens because of what I call the lack of toad's eye science. I distinguish eagle eye science and toad's eye science. Unfortunately, these days you see too much eagle eye science. I mean, don't get me wrong, we need both. Yeah. But there's too much of eagle eye science. Every graduate student who comes with a PhD idea to me to talk in Kathmandu, international or national, what are you doing? It's, oh, I'm doing this GIS mapping and satellite this and that. And I say, are you even going to a village to look at what's happening down there, for heaven's sake, So, if I find a student willing to go and work in a village, I'm willing to fall on my knees and worship the guy. The problem is, toad's eye science would have told you that there is 700 megawatts of diesel already going on and started formulating policies accordingly. There's a total absence or very weak toad's eye science. That cartoon was drawn by a Mekong cartoonist while I was giving a talk in Phnom Penh, one of these things. And what that refers to is a phenomenon that you have also in Rasua, then by the way in Tibet and Trans-Himalaya, but this is in Colorado. We were driving and a huge column of rain was coming down, and I said we're driving straight into that storm, and my friend said, yes, watch, We drove right there. Yes, thunder, lightning, column of rain coming out, you could see the sun shining on it. When we went there was not a drop on the ground. Because it's so high, so dry, like Tibet, that the raindrop evaporates before it hits the ground. The Native Americans have a word for it, which I've forgotten, and so do I believe the Hotias and Mustang and all have a word for it. But why that is symptomatic for me is that it's very symptomatic of international and national policies. There's lots of thunder and lightning, and you go to the ground, MDGs. Find me one Nepali farmer, one Indian farmer who's even heard of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goal. There's nowhere. So there's all these national and international policies that have a lot of thunder and lightning for lots of us, have absolutely no relevance down on the ground, and the toads are voting with their feet. Putting 700 megawatts of diesel already or migrating out to the Gulf has been mentioned. So this is where the problem comes. We need both, but there's a huge absence of that other toad's eye science right now. Now quickly on some Nepali issues. Now I should apologize because on each one of them I could speak for a whole day. It's really roiling the country. First issue, the failures and brewing conflicts I'll get into, is what's called the investment board. The Maoist Prime Minister of Nepal set up this investment board that India was under pressure to set up also, but India rejected, saying that our ministries are capable of doing it, we don't need this extra board. Anyway, this board has been set up, and now they're deciding on all major projects. And the problem is, they're bypassing all legitimate institutes, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Water Resources, the Department of Irrigation, and it's got only one civil servant, one politically appointed chairman, and 50 consultants, I believe, paid for by DFID. Okay. And now what's happened is there are Supreme Court cases, and the day I left Kathmandu 3 days ago, the Dash Maoists, we have two types of Maoists, the Cash Maoists and the Dash Maoists. The Dash Maoists are the more radical ones. They went to put black flags on the house of the chairman to have a sign of protest. So something like 25 of them were arrested. They've just been released this morning. But what this bad policy of setting up this investment board is doing is that it's reinvigorating a Maoist that was already marginalized. Because there are severe issues of 15 hours of power cuts in Nepal, 40% of the population still having no access to electricity, And this board is set up precisely to develop hydropower to export power to India. Now politically, this becomes a landmine, and every political party is going to suffer on this, and it's going to legitimize the Maoists all over again. I mean, this is a really weird thing that's happening. Second, on many of these big projects signed with Narendra Modi recently, there's a Supreme Court case going on, it's been a violation of the constitution. There's a Nepali constitution provision that says any serious resource sharing agreement like this needs to go through the parliament, and if it's extremely serious, and they have a criteria for that, it needs 2/3 majority parliament, otherwise a simple majority. Well, the current democratic government has even refused to bring it to parliament. And the activists who filed a court case saying that these hydro projects signed with India are illegal, the Supreme Court ordered that document to be brought to the Supreme Court. But the government said, it's secret. Now, agreement done with the private party being secret to the Supreme Court and the Parliament of Nepal, again, you see, it's going to legitimize the Maoists. That's all it's going to do. Now, the other issue, and I can talk whole length on that, is community electricity. This is something that is more than off-grid. Now, we're talking off-grid here. This is a very unique Nepali success story, I would say, whose basic philosophy is a couple of things. It is to give power to organized village groups to retail electricity by themselves. So what they do, and I started this when I was minister, and we got 18 of them off the ground. Nepal has huge success stories with community forestry, community water supply, and community irrigation. We have a history of that. So it's on that history that we initiated communitization of electricity. There was just too much talk of privatization, which is partly also needed. There's a need for some governmentalization, as a cultural theorist would say that, some privatization, but what is missing is this communitization, the voice of the community in these things. I'll describe later why public-private partnership is a bad idea. But this setting up of community electricity, now there are roughly 250, and I think it will soon be 300 groups across Nepal that buy electricity in bulk from the national utility and retail by themselves. Now, what would you say is great about it? The first thing is there's zero theft. And it's simply an institutional measure. I mean, tons of money have been spent, millions of dollars, on TA, technical assistance by the World Banks and all kinds of things, on loss reduction, and nothing has happened. But the simple institutional means, what it does is you have two metering. A bulk metering at the grid, the national utility level, and a retail metering by the community. And the two have to match. And there is so much community pressure now that anybody stealing electricity is just boycotted by the community, name and shape. Okay. So theft has come down to zero. The small town of Mugling, which is on the road to Pokhara, was the only town that was private, that communitized. I faced great resistance with the trade unions in the national utility to do it in the urban sector. But so we said, in politics sometimes it's wise to take one step back and fight your other battle later. So anyway, we got the rural electrification thing out. It took me 27 drafts of the law in 6 months. I must be the only minister who read 27 drafts. The bureaucracy was cooperating only after the 16th draft. It's great fun. I mean, I can talk on and on this. But the bottom point was that the result was, like Googling, they had 36% loss and theft. Now it's come down to 9% and it's all technical ones. Okay. Town of Bhaktapur has 60% loss, most of it's theft, beyond 10%. Okay. You could have brought all this down and had a more healthy system. But there's opposition by the trade union. Now, I grew up, as most of you probably did, thinking of trade unions as this very progressive thing, right? That's how we grew up. My experience has been it's the most reactionary body I've ever come across in my life. They're opposed to any change. They're opposed to any innovation, and fight tooth and nail to keep the system hostage. Okay. I can quite now, I didn't like her when she was around, but I now quite begin to appreciate Margaret Thatcher. Having faced what I faced. And me coming from what I call slightly left of center, this is quite something. It's amazing that, it is, we all like to have good workers and worker rights and all that, but look at the mess they have created, and the current 15 hours power cut has to be a great extent to blame on them also. So that's where we are. Interestingly, politically, community electricity was opposed by two political forces on the right and the left. The so-called centrist Nepali Congress and the very left Maoist. I quite didn't understand. I had a great experience in the village when I was facing this. And it turns out that this concept goes against both of their politics. The Nepali Congress centrist politics was what we call gift development, Usedi Bikas. Gift development. You elect me, I'll go to Kathmandu, bring a gift for you. 5 electric poles I'll bring this time, you elect me next time, I'll put it up, and you elect me next time, I'll even put wires on it, okay? That's gift development. I mean, this actually got completely undercut by community electricity. There's no need to. The Maoists, here was an organizing principle in the village, outside of their Politburo chain of command, which was not under their control. So it was strange to see two political forces on the opposite ends of the spectrum opposed to something like community electricity. Okay, so this is on community electricity. Another big fight we're having is what is called solar buyback. It turns out that, I have almost a kilowatt of solar on my roof right now, the right to sell electricity back to the grid. There's a big fight going on, and again, the opposition is from the national utility and the trade unions there. But it turns out that if just a simple measure of allowing time of day metering and net metering to go, and it's quite simple now, it's quite cheap. I was asking you that question yesterday. That alone would obviate any power cut, this 15-hour power cut, between 10 in the morning to 4 in the evening. The calculations show it. But the trade unions won't allow it. And the government would not have to invest anything in it because already 46 megawatts of solar have been installed in Kathmandu homes. And the figure shows that from what we know from surveys, something like 250 could be installed within 6 months. Chinese panels are coming by truckloads right now into Kathmandu. So this is another one of these things. Ropeways. Now, we need to take our transport away from diesel. And I should mention that this 700 megawatts of diesel private generation, plus, the Maoist Prime Minister allowing the import of cars openly. What kind of Maoism that is, it boggles my mind. What that has now done is we spend 137% of our total export earning importing diesel. Country is bankrupt. It's kept afloat by remittances. And remittances have become almost, almost 35% of the GDP already. It's an extremely unhealthy Dutch disease impact kind of a thing on the economy. It shouldn't be going. Now, this ropeway, some of us have been arguing for the last 10 years that making micro hydro feasible in the village, ropeways are the best option, because in Nepal you have two mature industries, small hydro and suspension bridge building, thanks to the Swiss, over the last 40-50 years. Now these two are mature industries, that Nepalis have the capacity to build a lot of the equipment themselves, erect it, survey, do everything with that. What is a ropeway? A goods carrying ropeway? And our problem is, you have a valley bottom where there might be a road, and the village is something like, 5 hours climbing up vertical. That would go in a ropeway in 15 minutes, carrying goods. Now carrying it on your back is for 5 hours is something else. Now this is experimental, we've done it, we've seen the numbers, and what it shows is if you can get these two industries to be married, it would mean that we would obviate and take our transport immediately to a hydro, because our ropeways then would be powered by micro hydro. Micro hydro would suddenly become much more feasible, and where it has happened in a couple of places in the district of Durham, we've seen that. You build a micro hydro plant, whatever, 25, 50 kilowatt, whatever, and a ropeway, normally a 3-kilometer ropeway really needs about 12 kilowatts. You have 25 kilowatt micro hydro, supplying lighting for 4 or 5 hours in the evening and almost dead the rest of the day. A ropeway means from sun up to sundown it will be carrying load up and down, almost using almost all of its power. And when they've installed it, they found out that putting a ropeway together with a micro hydro meant that you can give electricity as a social good for free, if you wanted. And the payback with a ropeway was almost a year and a half, and you're done. Right now, micro hydros are not feasible simply because electricity at homes doesn't pay for it. Now this is proved, but the transport lobby and the diesel lobby is so strong right now, and they practically own political parties, whether on the left or the right. And so this is where this kind of technology It's just not coming in, even though it is mature, it's been proved, everything is there. Okay. Another very Nepali thing going on, I mean, this I won't get into detail, is the questioning of chilling. I'm saying this only because Ben is here, but we'll talk about this separately. It was one of the cheapest hydro plants built in Nepal with Nepali expertise, and we all praised it. Now the issue is coming of ethics. It turns out these are all utility guys who set up a private company, and you're directors of a national utility, and you set up, and a national utility can't supply electricity, it's 15 hours power cuts a day, and you set up another company on the side, and give yourselves a buyback electricity purchase rate that's so good that out of embarrassment they had to cap that rate in 2011. It's just ethically now the questions are coming up. So there are all these issues. Now, all this mess needs to be sorted out by a new Electricity Act. Unfortunately, in the last elected Constituent Assembly, 4 prime ministers tried to bring an act, and they failed. This one's failing also. Interestingly, when they first tabled the bill, 142 amendments were tabled in the against the bill from across the political spectrum, from the extreme left Maoists to the extreme right. Interestingly, on some of the same issues. And this is all because community electricity guys from across Nepal, East and West, 300 of these groups, put down the problems they had with the Electricity Act, which was very, very fair, geared towards export and not supplying to Nepal. Now this is where the problem lay. It circulated to their members and said, go catch your member of parliament by the throat and ram it down his throat. And that's exactly what they did, and they got 142, amendments in the parliament. Because of that, they still have not got, the government hasn't got its act together to get that act. Now, we see all these flux and things going on, my question now comes, what does it mean for a transition to a renewable future? My argument here is, we first have to begin from the larger global context. Larger global context is really, despite rhetoric, despite what we all do, not really favorable. Why is it not favorable? Let's reflect back, and I'm also part of this debate, and I'm losing interest right now on this MDG to SDG stuff right now. I call it stuff because, I've been in so many meetings. The Millennium Development Goal has nothing to say on energy. Energy was excluded completely. Now in SDG, there's an attempt to come back with it, on the energy issue, but it should have been there in MDG. Now, as a researcher, my first question is, why, how in the name of God, could someone think of Millennium Development Goals to eradicate poverty without having energy in the picture at all? Now, these are very smart people who do this. These are not fools, okay? My working hypothesis, and this is what I'm going to challenge you with, is think of the time. It is 1992, Rio 1992. I was there in Rio plus 20 afterwards. This is a question I asked there. Well, 1992, communism has just collapsed. There's a victorious NATO around, I guess. George Bush, the father, not Bush the son then, Bush the Holy Bush, I don't know. But Bush the father and company, at that point, with the Washington Consensus, seemed to have decided that energy is not a development issue. Energy is something the private sector does. Energy is something that Halliburton does. It's none of the development community's business to look at energy. Yes, water, yeah, wash, sanitation, drinking water, yeah, that's all right. I suspect that's what happened. The trouble is, and I'll get to that in a little later, there's a nexus. There's an entwined predicament between water, energy, and food. And that's coming out more and more obvious now. But this basic failure of MDG being energy blind, meant basically that the development international community stayed away from energy, renewable or non-renewable, really effectively, since 1992. So we wasted 20 years in addressing energy issues that we are now trying to talk about post-2015 on how to go ahead. For those of us in Nepal, for instance, what is the lesson? One, somebody asked me, I said, if I were water resource and hydropower minister again, I need to build dams, I need to supply electricity to 15 hours of power cuts a day, 40% people who don't have access to electricity. Would I go to the World Bank? I'll go to the Chinese. Why? Because the World Bank has so many conditionalities. They still have not, since 1996, been able to develop a power development fund in Nepal. Not pour concrete and build a dam. Just build a power development fund from the committed fund to Arundhati. And it's 19 years and they haven't been able to do that. It's conditionalities after conditionalities after conditionalities after conditionalities, you know. So we're not interested in that, you know. Yeah, fine, you put your conditionalities there, put reasonable. But I have come to the conclusion that most World Bank conditionalities are meant only to protect their own staff. I call it cover your ass conditionalities. And this has nothing to do with development, and the World Bank has effectively been marginalized out of hydropower almost for good. Okay. Now, the model we are looking at is in Nepal. There is a Tamakoshi project. It's wholly Nepali funded. It's the largest project now. And it's going on. Yeah, there's protests, there's this, there's that. But it's being built with Nepali money. It's the largest project. And none of the donor projects are going ahead, but this one's going ahead. So why? Second, Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, no donor would fund it. Now they've gone ahead and built it. Okay? Every mobile phone call you make in Ethiopia, part of the money goes to the dam. You know? So there is something about national development that must come back to our debate about the role of foreign aid and, you know, international development, and whether that role has been honest or not. Now that role is being forced upon us with the financial global tectonics that's going on. The Chinese bank, investment bank, and the BRICS bank. Okay. I mean, interesting now that America put so much pressure on Australia, Korea, Indonesia, and others, they would not join. Now Britain broke ranks and is joining, and now everyone is rethinking it, you know. Nepal is a founding member right from day one, okay? This thing. But there is something going on there. And something about the marginalization of the Bretton Woods arrangement that's going on. That requires serious rethinking and serious reflection over to talk about rethinking development and what development means. And that is not really happening to the energy and intensity that is required of the academic community right now. There are conceptual roadblocks. And first one I would say is on hydropower, and I can talk about other areas also. Hydropower, now you and I, we all grew up thinking hydropower, what's the economics of hydropower, taught to all of us, you know. Well, 5 years of development, let me simplify, you know, where money is spent, there's only interest you pay to the bank and all. After 5 years, your interest is to make sure that the first turbine comes online as soon as possible so that it starts generating money. Maybe by 7 years, you've got all your turbines on. Maybe by 14th year, you know, you're break even. I mean, this is the economics movement. Now, that's theory. My experience as a minister and as a scholar has been something different. Okay, 5 years, you've got a contract with the developer. Now, the developer is really on the Enron model. Even now. Okay, Enron was more iconic, understandable, but we still have developers, most of them on the Enron model, where they intend to make money during construction, not in the life as an energy manager for the life of the energy project. So the whole idea is how do you make money within the construction period. Of course, in 5 years you can't make all the money. So there's a tendency to go for variation orders, prolonging the time, and increasing the cost. And every project is suffering because of that. So this is something that is really serious sort of rethinking. Climate change throws out much of the technical design that we learn in universities out the window. Because climate change is telling us future is not going to be like the past. If the future is not going to be like the past, all our regression models of, you know, hydrology and all that was out of the window. And that surprise is visited again and again and again. Vishnugarh people put in India, where a 400 megawatt power plant is now under 50 or 60 meters of rubble of the cloudburst. Okay. This to me is more explainable through causal theory, and I won't go into detail, you guys are mostly aware of it. Now causal theory, I find it useful, the Mary Douglas stuff, simply because it seems to have much more explanatory power. If something better comes, I'm willing to accept it, but so far I've not seen it. Okay. So the 4 organizing styles that give you 4 types of electricity socially, okay? A private electricity as a private good, generators, you know, and inverters and so on and so forth. Electricity as a public good, utility supply. Electricity as a common pool good, you know, which is where all the activists and egalitarians fight about. And electricity as a club good from which the poor are excluded because they're not members of the club. This leads to this three organizing principles, organizing styles that we talk about. Bureaucratic hierarchism, market individualism, and activist egalitarianism. They deploy three types of power. Coercive power, persuasive power, and moral power. They have three perceptions of risk: risk-taking, risk-managing, and risk-avoiding, or risk-sensitizing. They go on with three styles of institutional filters for what is information and what is noise. It provides a much richer sort of a background, okay? Now, what this helps us do is that it tells us that the current model of public-private partnership is only that the two apexes on that side, excluding the civic, activist, egalitarian voices. And this is where the problem lies. We are talking, most of us, are not PPP, public-private partnership. We are saying public-private civic partnership, and if the civic is missing, you have a definition of fascism. You know, with the state being completely subsumed under the private sector. And that's what we are having in the third world, and which is why the Maoists are getting energized all over again. So this is where that issue has to come back. In community electricity that I talked about, this is what we try to do. Unbundle, okay? Generation can be in the private, but I don't think any storage project in the world has been built by the private sector properly, not in the South. You need state involvement. Okay? Transmission is a national highway. It has to be very strongly state developed and all that, because it's an intergenerational problem. You can't get money out of this thing. Much as people may try, it doesn't work. Distribution, communitized, means the community has a voice in there. Now, this kind of pluralized power system, it turns out, is more accountable, more reflective, more reflexive, and is able to work. Which is why a communitized electricity in Nepal was able to find a spring source from which it was there, but nobody saw it. There was a blindness, on the Trisuli, on Gajuri, near just down below Gajuri. And they found this spring source. They built the tank. They built a pump with electricity from community, through a generator, put it on a pond up 42 meters higher up, got their drinking water out, but also started drip irrigation in a region that was so poor that people could feed themselves only 4 months of a year, coming back to livelihood. 4 months of a year, and 8 months of a year they had to go out finding labor work somewhere in India or Nepal. Now they earn so much money they don't need to go out. And that's because community electricity and this rethinking of the institutional mechanism has allowed growing cauliflowers where only barley grew before. So that's, I think I'll end with that, with one sentence, that all this is coming together in the Nexus debate. Now that's a big issue. I think in September Sussex will be talking more about it. Two things have to be taken into account on the Nexus debate. The Nexus comes together on the issue of storage, whether it is electricity storage, water storage, or food storage. Okay? And the Nexus comes together on transport, whether it is transporting water, energy, or food. And in these two, there are two intellectual sort of themes that have to be addressed. Efficiency, which the markets and governments love, and footprints, which the egalitarians and governments love. And so if these things can be brought together on the electricity and renewable issue, probably we will find some wisdom. Thank you.
I am a bit concerned about our time drifting away. But if there's one question somebody desperately wants to put to Dipak, you can invite one question. Oh yes, Simon.
Why aren't you standing for being minister again?
I'm an unreconstituted monarchist in these very Republican times. I don't belong to any political party. I do what I call not party politics, but issue politics. So I'm very much in politics of water and energy. And interestingly, I'm being listened to by two extreme ends of the spectrum, the Dash Maoist and the monarchist RPP Nepal. And there's also the Janamorcha on the left. But interestingly, the centrist parties don't seem to be interested in what we're saying. And my explanation for that is very simple. The centrist parties are mostly owned by these very shady developers, these very shady, it costs a lot of money to run the kind of Westminster model on the Bagmati democracy. So there's also the big debate now we're having as let's rethink democracy. And maybe the Westminster model is not the best model for us. Maybe some other model has to come about.
Amen.
And if I can just do a final plug for Dipak. So he was mentioning at the end the whole need to rethink development, and this is the title of the book that he's currently
hopefully
working on,
coming soon.
co-writing with Michael Thompson, Rethinking Development. Watch out for it when it comes. Thank you very much. I'd like to now invite Judith Cherny from